Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to a very special episode in our 2025 Heritage Talk series, brought to you by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. My name is Glenn Patterson, and I'm one of the project directors at the network. Working the Zoom and live streaming tech production today is my colleague, the ever-talented Allison Kirkwood. And Heritage Talks is made possible thanks to the generous support of the Zeller Family Foundation and Canadian Heritage. So just a little bit about the network we like to call QAHN. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan network of members that is open to all. For everyone joining live right now, we're running a special promotion. If you're not already a member, for the length of this broadcast, we're giving 30% off the cost of an individual year-long membership. So for $20, you can become a member of QAHN for the next year. Among other perks, membership comes with a subscription to our beautiful quarterly magazine, Quebec Heritage News. It's filled with wonderful editorials, articles on local history, heritage topics, book reviews, and news from the network. So if you're on Zoom, just send us a message in the chat box to claim the discount, and we'll get in touch with you after the broadcast. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just send QAHN a message there or to our email, which is home@qahn.org. Just make sure to provide your name, mailing address, and email. We also accept e-transfers and PayPal to that same email address, home@qahn.org. Okay, so I just want to welcome everyone joining us today on Zoom. We have a great crowd, Facebook Live, or on QAHN's YouTube channel. If you're on Zoom, please keep your microphones muted and your video cameras off, except during those moments where we might be taking a question from the audience. You can use the view icon in the top right corner of Zoom to switch between the full screen speaker view and the so-called gallery view grid layout. We suggest the speaker view for the best experience. For those joining on Facebook and YouTube or Zoom, leave us comments and your questions in the chat box below the video. And also let us know where you're joining us from today. It'd be great to see how far we reach with this broadcast. So March is officially here, and that means many of our member organizations are kicking off their green season activities, which usually lead up to whatever they're going to be doing on St. Patrick's Day or just around St. Patrick's Day. So the Irish presence in Quebec dates back to the 1600s colonization of New France in the St. Lawrence Valley. Some estimates put the Irish population at 5% of the new colony in the 1600s. Their numbers only increased throughout the 18th and 19th centuries as hundreds of thousands left their homeland in search of a better future in Canada. Many of them and their descendants would go on to make remarkable contributions to Quebec society and culture. From notable politicians, doctors, musicians, poets, authors, to the everyday women and men who built the fabric of Irish communities across this province, from urban enclaves in Quebec City and Montreal to rural communities like Sheenboro, St. Columban, Shannon, Valcartier, Frampton, Cascapedia, St. Jules, and Douglastown. So today's event is part of a larger series we're doing this year to celebrate the unsung heroes who laid the foundations of Quebec's diverse English-speaking heritage sector. We're interested in what motivated these people, often volunteers, to devote themselves so passionately, sometimes for years, even decades, to the cause of cultural heritage. What challenges did they face and overcome, and what lessons did they learn along the way? I think exploring these people's stories, it's not only a way to honor their legacies, it's also a way for us to become inspired and take their examples and lessons forward into our own communities. So today in particular is about celebrating the people and organizations who have been protecting and stewarding living Irish cultural heritage in Quebec and the memory of Quebec's Irish communities all across the province. So we have representatives from a few of these groups to tell us about their work and share their Irish heritage with us. So this sets the stage for our first guests, who I'm going to introduce shortly. They're going to be telling us all about an amazing trailblazer for Irish heritage in Quebec City in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. So Marianna O'Gallagher, who passed away almost 15 years ago, was born in St. Foy to parents of Irish descent. She belonged to the Sisters of Charity and taught for many years at St. Patrick's High School, where she acquired a reputation for infectious enthusiasm for the history of the Irish community around Quebec City. She was a recipient of the Ordre national du Québec in 1988 and the Order of Canada in 2002. On the floor of the Canadian Senate, the week after she passed away in 2010, then Canadian Senator Dennis Dawson proclaimed that, quote, Marianna O'Gallagher, who died last week, deserves by far the title, the greatest Irish Canadian of Quebec City. Marianna was prolific as both a scholar and an advocate for the preservation of Irish heritage in Quebec. By the time she completed her 1976 master's thesis about St. Patrick's Church in Quebec, she had already founded the organization called Irish Heritage Quebec and had begun working to have the former quarantine station on Grosse-Île recognized as a National Historic Site to honor the thousands of Irish victims who fled the Great Famine only to perish there from typhus in the late 1840s. She would go on to author several books about the Irish of Quebec City, as well as Grosse-Île. And indeed, in 2003, our own organization, QAHN, would honor her lifelong contributions with our annual Marion Phelps Award. And so this brings me to our first two guests who are joining from Irish Heritage Quebec. Joe Lonergan was nurtured with a love for all things Irish. He's a retired school teacher, and he served as president of Irish Heritage Quebec from 2009 to 2022. He's married with 4 children and 5 grandchildren. Bryan Gallagher, who's joining him, is a native and lifelong resident of Quebec City. Bryan is the current president of Irish Heritage Quebec and a chairman of the Board of Governors of the St. Bridget's Home Jeffrey Hale Hospital in Quebec. He's been a member of the Quebec Bar for almost 35 years and practices in the field of commercial law. Since February 2024, he's been the Honorary Consul of Ireland for the province of Quebec. Welcome, Bryan and Joe. So I'm going to start off with a question for Bryan. Bryan, I want to start by getting a little glimpse into Marianna, not just through her heritage activism, but also a little bit her personality as well. And of course, you two share a last name. So could you tell the people here with us today your relationship to Marianna and your early memories of her and just what kind of person she was?
Yeah, hi, Glenn. Thanks for having us today. Greetings to everybody online. I recognize many names coming through in the chat, so hi to everybody. You gave part of her glowing CV there, Glenn. So Marianna was many things to many people, but to myself, she was above and first and foremost an aunt. She was my father's eldest sister. Marianna was one of a pretty big brood of children who grew up on Chemin Saint-Louis, just at the top of the hill as you come off the Quebec Bridge. There was Marianna was the eldest. My uncle John O'Gallagher, who many of you may have known in the past, was also MNA in the West Island for several years. My father Brendan and his twin brother Patrick, who lived in Sherbrooke most of his life, and their brother Neil, and my aunt Ellen Claire, who's still with us today, the last of the family. So Marianna was a teacher for some, a historian for others, a great public figure, a founder of great institutions, but for us, she was our aunt.
Lovely. And Joe, you knew Marianna through a slightly different context. Can you tell us about how you met Marianna and your early impressions of her?
I first met Marianna when I started teaching in September of 1971. And she was aware of me through my family, and I was delighted to meet her. I'd heard of her and her interest in Irish history, and we had a mutual interest. And we were in the same department. We were in the history department at St. Patrick's, and we got along famously for a couple of years. And I went away for a couple of years to continue my studies, and I came back, and Marianna was still there. And by that time, there had been an accident where some of the sisters had been injured and Marianna took over the St. Patrick's Day show at St. Patrick's, and I joined up with her. And from that year on, from about 1975 up to about 1987, we put the show on together. So we were quite close.
Lovely. I was, doing a bit of background research, and I got the sense that 1973 was an important year for her it was the year that she both started visiting the former quarantine station on Grosse-Île, as well as the year that she would go on to found Irish Heritage Quebec. And I was wondering, were these two events related or inspired by one another?
Glenn, I think that the whole story of Grosse-Île and how it came to be a National Historical Monument site of Canada was more or less in Marianna's DNA. Her grandfather, Jeremiah Gallagher, was our ancestor who first came to Quebec City, um, found himself president of the AOH of Quebec City and several other Irish groups in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he led the move to install and put up the Celtic cross there in Grosse-Île. Marianna's father, my grandfather Dermot, also worked to keep that memorial there into the 1970s with the help of Dr. Larkin Kerwin at Laval University, another proud Irish Quebecer. And Marianna's whole link to that story, I think, was very, very deeply ingrained in her. And you're probably right that something tweaked in her there in the 1970s. And then she became very much involved in seeking out federal recognition of the importance of that site to all of us.
Did she ever talk about that? I assume it was her first trip there, but the impressions that it made on her, I'm not sure if that ever was kind of passed down in the oral history.
I don't recall that the 73 period. I was a bit younger then, but I do recall our first family trip to Grosse-Île in 1981. It was still a closed facility at the time. We had to get special permission to go there, but we went out as a family. Some of us took the boat. Some of us got to fly on that little plane that has about 6 seats in it, and we went out there as a family gathering. And she took us around. So she was, by then, even in the early 80s, very familiar with the layout of the island. She'd been out there a few times, but at this point, she was very motivated in seeing that whole island become a National Historical Site, and that the tale of the Irish and what happened at Grosse-Île could be told. And that was a very marking visit for myself and my brothers and sisters and my cousins who went out there that day.
Wow, I bet. And approximately how long did it take before like her efforts bore fruit, and you started seeing the recognition and the kind of the infrastructure for this memory?
I think it was probably a 20-odd year venture, because I mean it's a federal facility. There were different ministries who had different visions of what to do with the site. It was being used as an animal quarantine station up into the late 70s, early 80s. There were people in Quebec City and elsewhere who had very strong views as to the future of the site and how the commemoration should be presented. And ultimately, Marianna was someone who brought in, I think, the common themes from many of the different competing views, and made it happen with the help of Sheila Copps, who was a great friend of hers, who was Minister of Canadian Heritage back then in the early 80s, from Hamilton. And they, with folks on the South Shore, on Montmagny, et cetera, were able to push the federal government in the right direction. And Parks Canada then took over the facility from Agriculture Canada. And then it became its mission statement was changed to one that made it a National Historical Site, and of course with the emphasis on the Irish story at Grosse-Île.
Right, right. I want to maybe either you or Joe might be able to speak to this. What I'm curious about is, when she founded Irish Heritage in Quebec, like what was the state of the Irish community in Quebec City, and in specifically like activities and organizations around heritage and culture? Was there already an existing like infrastructure or organization or people that were doing heritage activities before Irish Heritage Quebec was founded that she sort of took the baton from, or was this something that was more like she was a trailblazer, so to speak?
I'm going to let Joe jump in there, because Joe was probably more involved that period of time when Irish Heritage came to be.
Yes, Marianna, I didn't receive the baton from anybody, because Irish organizations had folded basically by that time. The last one had been the Ladies Auxiliary of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and they pretty well folded up in 71, 72, maybe even 1970. Marianna established Irish Heritage Quebec in 1973. I happened to be away, but I remember either just before I left or just after I was back, I went to the island with her, and before it was open to the public on a boat. And I remember also going to a meeting on Grand Isle with her and Lark and Kerwin, talking about the development of the island. She also eventually, as the movement unfolded, to get it going, she did get some support from a group in Toronto, Action Grosse-Île. I'm saying it in French, but actually it was they were Anglophone Irish from Toronto behind that group. So she started Irish Heritage Quebec from scratch. She wasn't taking over any other existent Irish organizations at the time.
Right. And in terms of early activities, which might include Grosse-Île, but what were the, I'd say, early priorities in maybe the first 10, 15 years of Irish Heritage Quebec?
One of the main things she did at the beginning was she got students together, and they put together a 4-volume work on an index of Irish marriages in the greater Quebec City area, which is a terrific work and very helpful for people doing their genealogy. They put another little publication together, Our Heritage, tribute to the Irish community in Quebec. And this was long before she got into publishing books through Kerrig Publications, which was a later endeavor on her part.
Right. I'm wondering, were there other people involved in the leadership of Irish Heritage Quebec in those first 10 or so years? Like, was there like a committee or a board? I know now you have that kind of structure, but in the early days, what was that like, the leadership?
Well, Marianna was the heart and soul of the organization. There's no question about that. But some of the other founders would have been Lark and Kerwin and Harry Hannon, and I think Yolande O'Neill, local. I think she was a chiropractor. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned publishing there, Joe. So I was reading it in 1981. She founded this publishing company called Carrick Books. Of course, as we know, she was a prolific author of books on Quebec's Irish history. Can either you or Bryan tell us about her time as an author and publisher? I know, Bryan, in our test the other day, you were sharing some memories there as well.
Yeah, sure, Glenn. I mean, Carrick Books came about after Marianna had published or drafted 2 books. One, the story of St. Bridget's Home, another story of St. Patrick's Church and Parish. And she had all sorts of ideas. That was something she was never short on. And she had also very great interest in the works of others. And one thing that Marianna used to do was always say to people, well, prepare a talk, put together a conference, write down your thoughts. Write a book, write an article, publish in a historical journal, and get the story out there. And she was very, very important for many people. One of our members at Irish Heritage Quebec is Steve Cameron in Saint-Agathe-de-la-Binière. And Steve, every time he steps up on a stage to give a conference, will always say that the first person who told him to get going with this was Marianna, and he certainly doesn't regret it, and I'm sure she doesn't regret it either. Now, publishing books then became a bit of a passion of hers, and a lot of this was going down at the kitchen table in my house when I was a teenager. So we'd sit around the table. We had piles of envelopes, piles of books, order sheets, and this is before fax machines and email, of course, and everything's by hand, and we're counting cash, and we're putting books into envelopes, and we're taking them to the post office the next day. So my mother and I were sort of her administrative staff over the years, and we'd manage the PO box here at the post office. We'd go to the bank to deposit checks and cash coming from all over the United States and Canada. And it was really it was actually exciting when you'd sit down once a month to do this, and you'd see these orders coming in from all over the place, Irish names from all over America and Canada. And there was some enthusiasm there because people were interested in the story. And the book that really, I think, brought her to the forefront was Gateway to Canada, the story of Grosse-Île, which more or less at this point was an unknown story for many, many, many people, and attracted great attention both in English and in French, and it's still her most popular title of the books that she put out.
Wow. I want to fast forward. I mean, I know there's such the range of activity she was involved in is so immense, but I want to fast forward to 2010, St. Patrick's Day parade. Obviously, Marianna's role was highly significant. Can both of you just share what you remember of the 2010 St. Patrick's Day parade? Tell us how it was important, and I guess what it meant to Marianna, but also maybe what it meant to the Irish community in Quebec as well.
I'll jump in, Joe, and I'll let you follow up. I mean, the parade in 2010 was the return to an event that had more or less been suspended back in the late 30s, I think. But it wasn't her first large scale event. Marianna put together, with the help of many volunteers, a celebration called the Irish Summer in 1997, which actually generated a lot of attention. We saw the Jeannie Johnson come over from Ireland to Quebec in the course of that celebration. We have the folks in Strokestown at the Family Museum who recognized the role of Quebec City in the whole story by setting out a Celtic cross, which is still down on McMahon Street. And then Marianna, again, one project after another, always reaching out to her former students who had made their way through life into nice positions of influence, and she would reach out to people to say, "You got to do this for me. You got to help me with this. You got to help me with that." So it came to be that the 2010 parade took shape and happened on the streets of Quebec, and it was a fantastic day. A little did anybody know, except a few of us in the family, Marianne at this point had lung cancer and had less than 3 months to live when she was riding around the Grand Marshal of the parade in the back of Jacques Lavoie's old pickup truck. There you go. So that's a shot of Marianna in front of St. Patrick's High School on de Maisonneuve, holding a banner there with our family crest on it. And my nieces rode in the truck with her, along with my mother. And I ran alongside taking photos all day long. It was a great start to an event that is back on the streets on the 22nd of March. Marianna had great respect for our friends in Montreal who are going to be having their 200th edition of the parade in a couple of weeks on the 16th of March. And I believe she was a participant in many occasions. And we were happy to have our own parade in Quebec City start up in 2010. And it's run every year except for the 3-year suspension during the pandemic.
Wow. Joe, how about what you remember of that?
There was a fellow had been here for 2 or 3 or 4 years, a fellow by the name of Peter Farrell from County Sligo in Ireland. And he'd been running a pub, and he took into his head that he'd try and reestablish the parade in Quebec City. And I don't know when he and Marianna became familiar with each other, but one day he was talking to her and said that within a couple of years he'd like to get this parade going. And Marianna said to him, "This year, not in a couple of years, this year." And sure enough, he fast forward and he got it going that year. And of course, Marianna was the first Grand Marshal, as Bryan has been saying.
Very good. Bryan, in our test the other day, you had an artifact. It was related to one of the stories. You mentioned her work, her connections to Ireland as well. Could you show us? I think you know the one I mean, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Marianna obviously was well known in Canada and Quebec for her storytelling, but her knowledge was well respected across the Atlantic in Ireland. So Marianna had the occasion of welcoming 2 Irish presidents to Quebec. Mary McAleese and Mary Robinson both came to Quebec and to Grosse-Île. And this is a cross. It's in ebony. It was carved by the prisoners at Mountjoy Prison in Dublin, and it was given to Marianna in 1999 when they presented a play based on Marianna's books called Flight to Grosse-Île, so leaving Ireland, coming across the Atlantic. So they gave this to Marianna as a gift, which she received at the prison after the presentation of this play. So it's just one example of how she came to be very well known and very well respected for bringing this story back out, because the story of the famine and the famine as it relates to Quebec in particular remains something of a mystery even today for many people in North America and in Canada and even in Ireland. But she certainly got the ball rolling on this.
Wow. I just noticed Alison forwarded me a comment from Facebook, someone from the west of Ireland, saying that her Kilkenny ancestors, the Dorans, migrated to Quebec in 1848 or 50. But I suspect, that why is she here with us today? Like I think the impact of people like Marianna O'Gallagher, that grassroots movement, activism, writing letter, like doing the correspondence once a month, like that, it has impact, and that lasts, for decades and decades, even longer. I wonder, just to sort of wrap up today, from both of you, I'd actually just like to hear about maybe how Marianna influenced you as either as people or through your, as it relates to your work in heritage. Also, if you have a particular memory or anecdote you want to share, that would be lovely too, but no pressure.
Marianna taught me more about my roots. I mean, we were always fans and great lovers of history at our house, but Marianna in particular opened up some leads that I've decided to follow, and it has brought me a great interest in the story of the Irish in Quebec and the links between Quebecers and Ireland, which I'm working on today in my role as honorary consul, which I'm very proud of, that we can still do this 200 odd years, and going back to New France times, as you said, Glenn, that this very long historical and deep ties still exist today, in a world where we're all looking for friends this week. I think the ties and the friendship between the Irish and Quebec remain very strong, and I'm happy to do my part to maintain that.
Thank you, Bryan. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Marianna turned I always had an interest in Irish history, but Marianna turned my focus toward local Irish history. That's why I was happy when Marianna passed away in May of 2010. She was well aware somehow that she was sick in the previous fall, and we talked, and she was happy that I'd replace her as president at the time. And after that, I felt I had a responsibility to carry on an interest in the preservation of Irish heritage in Quebec City, because that's what I identify her with, as remembrance and preservation of Irish heritage in Quebec City.
Lovely. Very touching, both of you. I remember my first road trip to Quebec City and Eastern Quebec. I was with my dad and brother, probably about 1996. I just finished my first year of high school, and for my Belfast-born father, it was very important for us as Irish Canadians to visit Grosse-Île and understand the role of the island, and Quebec as well, in the Irish experience in Canada. I remember my dad would always say, when he immigrated to Canada in the mid-60s, Quebec City was the ship's first port of call. And his observation was just how much bigger the bags of chips were in Canada compared to Ireland. But, it was like whatever he had learned about Grosse-Île that inspired him to bring his two obnoxious teenage sons along. We were living in Toronto, so it was it was a long trip. But whatever he'd learned, it was almost certainly a result of Miss O'Gallagher's work. Like Bryan, you mentioned too, it was such a moving experience to be on the island for the three of us and reflect. And I never thought that almost 30 years later I'd get to talk with two people connected to this amazing woman, whose efforts were such an important catalyst for the memory of this island, but also just the Irish story in Quebec. So I just want to thank Bryan and Joe for your time. Really appreciate it. They have a great website. Look up Irish Heritage Quebec. Follow them on Facebook too. Joe's often posting anecdotes and remembrances, as well. They have conferences quite often, so you can check them out in person, but I know they've been recording quite a few of their conferences. You can find them on YouTube. Anyways, a great organization. Great to get to know both of you a little bit better. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thanks, Len.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So we're now going to go out of town and up the river, so to speak. We're going to go north out of Quebec, up the Jacques-Cartier River to the historically English-speaking villages like Shannon, Valcartier, Pine River, Stoneham, and Tewksbury. So in 2019 and 2022, I was fortunate to be able to visit this area for the first time during while I was doing a survey of musical heritage in the province. Members of the Valcartier Historical Committee and the team behind the annual Shannon Irish Show and the Shannon Historical Society, they generously introduced me to the amazing traditional singers and instrumentalists in person, as well as through the collections of old home recordings that they'd been collecting. And so it was on that first trip that I met QAHN's now live streaming co-producer and documentary filmmaker, Alison Kirkwood, who helps with these heritage groups in Valcartier and Shannon, as well as with the revived St. Patrick's Day Parade in Quebec that we just learned about. She's a consummate photographer and media wizard. And when I met her, I knew Alison was just the sort of person who could help increase the visibility of musical heritage of English speakers in her region up around Valcartier and Shannon. So in the spring of 2020, I asked her if she would digitize a collection of old home recordings that the Historical Committee in Valcartier had collected, and if she could produce a documentary about musical heritage in the region using these archival materials that were collected locally, as well as some of the stuff I'd been collecting during my project. So the documentary was produced and released during the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020 and 2021. We're 5 years on now. I thought it would be nice to revisit her documentary. It's very touching, touching footage and music and oral history. We're going to watch the first 8 minutes of footage. If you're interested, you can catch the rest of it for free on QAHN's YouTube channel. In the meantime, enjoy this clip from Alison Kirkwood's Echoes of a Fine-Tuned Valley, Musical Memories of the Jacques-Cartier area.
Well, the first memories I can think of, I guess, would be the singing and dancing and instruments that would have been there to accompany people back in the late 50s. Anything to do with recorded music at that time was on a gramophone. Of course, by then there was TV and there was radio, but it was very primitive. I mean, if you wanted entertainment, you pretty well had to make your own. So there was a huge effort on the part of families in the community to have these community gatherings, whether they be formal or informal. Most of them were informal. When I was a kid, Valcartier and Shannon, the majority of the populations were Anglophone. So I think that was a major factor, you know. Parties where, you know, there were joint efforts. People would come from both. And Stoneham and St. Catherine's, there was a fair representation of Anglophones in those two also. If you go from Stoneham to Shannon, you're looking at maybe 45 minutes. So it's a fair ways away, and you still had people that knew the same folk songs. So there's something there to be said that, you know, there was a communication between them all.
Let ye all be Irish tonight. let ye all be Irish tonight. You French, Scotch and Germans, Italians and Jews, just act like McHennas, O'Sheas or McHughes, and I'll shake ye all by the hand, as if you came from Ireland. Forget all your troubles, your cares and your woes. Imagine you're one of the Macs and the O's. Do everything Irish, and I'll treat ye right. Let ye all be Irish tonight. So let ye all be Irish tonight.
Even before my time, I remember people often talking about the singers that were here in the community that would sing. George Murphy, the King family, a lot of the Kings were great singers where they had an enormous repertoire of songs. I didn't get to know them all that well, but I heard a lot about them and how they could sing. I remember one person mentioning that this fellow by the name of Dick Leahy went to a wedding reception, started singing late at night, and sang till daylight without singing the same song twice. So these people had enormous repertoires, which they learned from generations before them. So they had their own songs. It was like, I'm sure in other communities, Irish communities at least, where people would sit around and there would be a sing-song, 10 people in the room, 7 of them could sing, and everybody knew what the other person had as a repertoire. So even if you knew the song, you didn't start it up, you waited on it. It was a matter of courtesy, I guess. You let them sing their songs. We've had musicians, Alan King and Eric Corrigan and Oliver Douglas. There's been a lot of people that have been with accordions and fiddles that played at the dances and were very well received and did a lot for the communities. Would show up religiously for every event, even if they weren't feeling well, they were there, you know.
Side of the river.
She was up on the hill.
Up on the hill. And an old house. There was 8 of us in the family. And we had an outdoor seat outside in the summertime. That was our pastime. Keith had played the accordion. And we'd sit out on that bench and we'd sing.
Her father would play the violin.
And father used to play the violin.
Oliver Douglas, he was an accordion player and a fiddle player too.
Yeah.
But when you lived on the hill, you were talking about this little bench out at the back.
Yeah.
Her father would sit out in the evening with the fiddle and play a tune, and then he'd stop, and Oliver lived down below in the valley, and he'd answer him with the accordion. Same tune. Yeah. Billy told me that. Her brother told me that, Billy, yeah.
Well, the dancing started, I guess somewhere along the line when I was very young, you would like it or you wouldn't even try. It was a question of trying to imitate what you saw. So if you weren't interested, you'd just walk away from it when you were a kid, and nobody would even know if you had any talent to do that type of thing or not. So there must have been some initiative on my part when I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old to start to imitate somebody. It started from there. I think more than anybody, probably Harold Cack. There was one of the dancers from around here, and musicians. I sort of liked his style and his ability to do things. So I started imitating him. with regards to real time, I had my own style, which I'm not too sure how that all came about, but it seemed to work for me, so that's what I used.
Just wonderful. Wonderful stuff, Allison. Great work. So you can check out more of that on the QAHN YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Anyways, we have lots of stuff up there, but that's one of the documentaries I'm very proud of, as I'm sure Allison is as well. So it's now time to head west along the St. Lawrence River to Montreal, a place for many of us is synonymous with the Irish experience in Quebec. Of course, you know, the annual St. Patrick's Day Parade, the legion of Irish-themed pubs across the island, and the breathtaking St. Patrick's Basilica on René Lévesque at St. Alexandre are perhaps the most visible manifestations of Montreal's Irishness. But at the foot of the Victoria Bridge lies a humble but powerful monument to a pivotal chapter in the Irish story in Montreal and indeed the country. Our next speaker is going to tell us this story and the efforts to protect this hallowed site. Fergus Keys holds a degree in boards and governance. He serves as a member of the QAHN board of, and he serves as a member of the QAHN board of directors as well. He has extensive experience with nonprofit organizations, having served and continuing to serve on various diverse boards. As a founding member of the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation, Fergus was elected chairman of its board. He's a passionate advocate for heritage, and he has a particular interest in Quebec's rich history. Welcome, Fergus. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you, Glenn.
So come on and tell us about the Irish Monument Park that you've been working on. I guess you have a presentation you want to share too, eh?
Yeah. So we'll so a couple of years ago, or maybe 5 or 6 years ago, QAHN was nice enough to allow, through one of these heritage talks, for the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation to explain what our project was about. Obviously, probably not everybody saw that. So the first part of my presentation will be a little revamp of what our project is about. The second part of it is the great things that have happened since our last opportunity to speak about it at QAHN. We've had some really great successes, and it's quickly becoming a reality. So I'm going to start with my slideshow here, if I possibly can, because technically I'm not very technical, but let's see here, beginning.
You had it there from beginning. Click there.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, so first of all, the history. Now, the history is really just a continuation of what Bryan and Joe were speaking about in Grosse-Île. What ended up happening is 1847 was about the middle of a 5-year, what us old guys used to call the potato famine, and now they call the Great Hunger in Ireland. And during that period, more than 1 million Irish died in Ireland, and 1 million left. And of the million that left, about 100,000 headed for what was then called British North America. And they were not very well, of course, and they ended up on these coffin ships. They were carrying with them typhus. Many of them died en route on the St. Lawrence, were buried in the cold Atlantic Ocean. But some did make it, of course. Here you see an image of them being buried at sea. The problem is no one really knows how many of these 100,000 that left Ireland for Canada passed away during the voyage. The captains were supposed to keep a log. Most of them didn't bother. The ones that did would just write 6 immigrants died today, 2 men, 2 women, 2 children, something like that. So it didn't give us very much of a record. So we're never really sure. Some estimates go as high as 15,000 died just on the trip alone. The first big stop was, as Joe and Bryan were speaking about, Grosse-Île was the quarantine station. The ones who were sick were taken off. Of course, Grosse-Île became overwhelmed. There were thousands and thousands of Irish arriving sick and hungry, and there just weren't enough staff. So many of them were deemed well. And because they were deemed well, they were sent on to Montreal. But the problem is that they weren't deemed well, of course. So arriving in Montreal, they were not well. They were still carrying typhus. And the city of Montreal, under a mayor at that time called John Mills, built a number of fever sheds. The idea, of course, was to segregate these sick and dying Irish immigrants who were arriving from the population. We got to realize that in 1847, during this very summer, let's say from the spring until the late fall of 1847, more than 70,000 Irish arrived at Montreal. But Montreal only had a population of 50,000. So you can well imagine how overwhelmed the whole situation was. And during this very, very hot summer of 1847, at least 6,000 died and were buried. We have to take the 6,000, add it to the 5,000 who had already died at Grosse-Île, plus some who had died in New Brunswick and some that had died on the water on the Atlantic Ocean. And the ones who survived Montreal, more immigrants died in Kingston, in Cornwall, in Ottawa, in Toronto, in Hamilton. So it was an amazing amount of deaths and during that period of time. But going back to Montreal, the 6,000 were buried near what was called the Black Rock. So that was one part of the story. The Irish arrive, they die at Grosse-Île, they die in Montreal, they're buried in Montreal. And one part of our effort is to remember these Irish, of course. But the second part, which is every bit as interesting, is as these Irish were sick and dying, members of the community of Montreal at that time, who represented every language, every religion, every heritage, every culture, including Grey Nuns and many other members of both the Catholic and Anglican clergy, British soldiers who were still in Montreal in 1847. Of course, Shannon only became a country 20 years later. It was still controlled by the British in 1847. Some of them went to help and gave up their lives. So many of these caregivers also died helping them. Here's one example is, as I mentioned, Mayor John Mills had built the fever sheds for the Irish. But in addition, every night after finishing doing what mayors do all day, he went and provided nursing care to the Irish, feeding them soup, etc. And in October of 1847, he caught typhus and gave up his life. He's sometimes called the Martyr Mayor of Montreal, although he's generally forgotten to history. But he's one of the many caregivers that we also want to honor with the project. So what ended up happening after that, and how did the Black Rock arrive? Well, in 1859, which was only 12 years after this event, the Irish arrive and die in 1847, 1859, they're building the Victoria Bridge. Many of the workers on the Victoria Bridge were of Irish descent, of course. And during the construction, as they were ending the construction of the bridge, they came across some of the remains of the earlier Irish who had been buried there in 1847. The Irish builders of the bridge basically told the British, who were controlling the financing of the bridge, of course, that they wanted a monument and they wanted it right away and they wanted it for the Irish. Back and forth it went until eventually it was agreed that they took a big rock out of the St. Lawrence River, which was probably maybe river stone at the time, we would guess, and they placed it on top of the remains that they had found, inscribing it to the memory of the 6,000 immigrants that died. There was still some argument between the British and the Irish at the time. So the stone actually says the 6,000 immigrants, not the 6,000 Irish immigrants, although 99.9% of the immigrants, of course, were, if not 100%, were Irish. So in 1860, they installed this rock. And as traffic moves by and a train nearby, you end up with it turning a very deep black. So originally called the Irish commemorative stone, everyone just refers to it now as the Black Rock. So what has happened since the last time we spoke? Well, a number of really interesting things. I'm not sure at exactly what time in our development. We've been carrying on this project for more than 10 years, as mentioned. What happened after our last Quan talk, but so I'm just going to highlight a few things. One is that they were building, or some of you may know that they built the REM, new light transit rail system, around, right in very close proximity to Black Rock. They suspected that they would be digging into the original cemetery of 1847. The original main cemetery actually sits on CN land, where there was a CN train. And because of that, it was basically virgin ground. Nobody had ever built or did anything on that land. The train, of course, runs on a berm above the ground, so it wasn't really dug out. So Rem knew that there was a really good chance going into this into the cemetery that he might find some remains of the original Irish immigrants. And they did. They brought in actually a archaeologist, their only archaeologist. They designed a special basket. And in less than 1% of what we believe is the cemetery space, they lowered this basket, digging it by hand until they came across the remains of 14 Irish immigrants. They brought them to a laboratory where they were all tested. There were a couple of men, a couple of women, a couple of teenagers, a couple of children, I think one, maybe two babies. And they were able to determine a fair amount about these remains. They could certainly determine that they came from that period of time, from 1847. The archaeologists had to prove there was no particular reason why there'd be 14 remains buried in that spot, other than from the famine, but they have to determine it. And they determine it in various ways. One, just as a side interest story, is that as the Irish were dying in Ireland, the British organized the transfer of some corn, and this corn was sent from the United States to England and then back to Ireland for hoping to replace the potatoes that had been dying. Of course, this corn was not very good. It was actually cattle corn. It really didn't do the Irish any good. It caused them more trouble than it was worth. But as the archaeologists and as the laboratory was investigating these remains, they found corn in their teeth, and they could determine that that corn was from that period of time. So it's very, it's not my métier, but it was really quite amazing to watch them. So the next step in this venture, in this particular venture, is that these remains are now at a university in Paul Riviere. And at that university, they're hoping to develop as much DNA as possible from all of the remains. And it should only be in the next month or two that hopefully, it's been going on for a couple of years actually, but in the next few months, we hope to get the DNA. And we have a little committee on our board at the Montreal Irish Monument Foundation, led by Kelly O'Rourke. And we're going to see if there's any possibility we can find any ancestors of these original Irish immigrants. So this is one part of the project that's really quite exciting and has really moved it forward. Another thing that's happened since the last time we spoke at QAHN was that the Black Rock, not a great image, but if you see this Black Rock sits on a strip of land, and Bridge Street runs on both sides of it. So when we originally started this project way back a long time ago, both us and the city of Montreal were quite convinced that they owned that property that the Black Rock sat on, that property belonged to the Ville de Montréal. They didn't have a problem. They were going to do something with us. Yetta, yetta. Went on for well over a year before suddenly the city came back and said, listen, guys, we don't actually own that land. That land is owned by the Anglican Church of Canada. It was given to them at the end of 1860 when the bridge was built. The British were mostly Anglicans, and they gave that strip of land to the Anglican Church. Yes, they gave a much larger area, but that's another story. But that strip of land ended up belonging to the Anglican Church. We contacted the Anglican Church, and we were really pleased. Once we explained the project and the bishop understood, she, by the name of Mary Gibson, she agreed immediately to transfer this land to the ownership of the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation. So, you go through lawyers and notaries and a whole bunch of other nonsense. But in the end, we now are the proud owners of that strip of land, and the Black Rock officially is now under the control of the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation. The next step was a couple of months ago, Hydro-Quebec. Hydro-Quebec has been just like absolutely terrific to us. It's really difficult to say how much they've done for this project, how much they've contributed to it in time and dollars. And so a few months ago, Hydro-Quebec officially handed over just shy of 4 acres of land, about 3.8 acres of land, to make the park complete. So now we have the land given by the Anglican Church, plus the land now given by Hydro-Quebec. In this image, actually, the new ambassador from Ireland to Canada, John O'Connor, is actually attended this transfer of land from Hydro-Quebec to the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation, and was the speaker and mentioned about the famine Irish and Ireland's view of it, and how much they're supporting this project too. Of course, as things have been happening in and around the area, Hydro-Quebec has another group of archaeologists who do terrific work. Everywhere we go, it's checked first to make sure that we're not going to end up going on top of remains, etc. So this table was just a table of various pieces and things that had been found by the archaeologists as they move along in the area. And it was displayed at the event where Hydro-Quebec handed over the land to us. There's another little project going on that's called the Bronze Shoes that Brian O'Gallagher, I know, is very familiar with. I guess Joe is probably very familiar with too. This is a project that started in Ireland. The Bronze Shoes are a pair of shoes that were found from a small immigrant child who was walking from Stoneham to Liverpool, I believe it was, 1,500 of them. So this project started out only strictly in Ireland as what they were calling the immigrant way, and followed the march along. Since then, it's been now expanded to become more of the international Irish immigrant way, and of course, Canada's a big part of that. So what has happened is they developed these bronze shoes. They take these children's shoes, made them bronze, and you'll see them all through Ireland. But now you're going to start seeing them in Canada. As Bryan mentioned, on Grosse-Île, there will be a set of bronze shoes. In Quebec City, and at our project, Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation, there'll be another set of bronze shoes. And in St. Columban, which is another project we work on, pre-famine Irish, there'll be another set of bronze shoes. So we're very pleased that we were accepted by the Irish government to join this group and being displayed. So you'll be able to go all over the place. I believe they're doing something in South Africa and Australia, probably in the United States. So it'll probably be the longest international immigrant trail anywhere in the world. So we'll be part of it. So we're very pleased with that. So thanks to some funding up front by a number of groups, including the Quebec government under here we go, the Secrétaire aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. Say that 5 times. Anyhow, the Quebec government has provided us with some upfront funding for this project. So has the Irish government, so St. Patrick's Society, and a few others. And based on that, we've been able to commission a company called LeMay. LeMay is a very well-known company, at least in the Montreal area, designers, and they design a lot of stuff all over the world and stuff. So this is one example of what we hope the park will look like. Again, it's an artistic rendition, but you might see it that when it's finished, it'll be like this. There'll be kind of a meeting spot. People will be able to go along. There'll be a museum and interpretation center. It'll provide education on the Irish in Quebec and other groups, and so it should be beautiful in the end. As you can see, the Black Rock. People have asked a few times if Black Rock will be removed, and the answer is no. The Black Rock is the oldest monument to the Irish famine anywhere in the world, including in Ireland. And it's also, on top of being a monument, it's also obviously a gravestone, and it sits on the top of the graves of these Irish immigrants. So we have no intention of moving it 1 inch, but we'll build around it to make it, it'll be the central point, obviously. So this is just a artistic rendition of how it's going to look. So that's how we're moving along now, and it's coming along nicely. So let me just wish you all a happy Irish season 2025, and thank you for paying attention.
Thanks so much, Fergus. Great to have you on, as always. It's such an interesting spot. Obviously, Griffintown was once one of the centers of Irish experience in Montreal, with deindustrialization and now urban development. It's like it's very easy to miss the Black Rock, and I think my experience was always like you only just notice it as you've just driven by it. It would even be hard to know how to get if you were a pedestrian, but it really seems like what you're doing is providing a tranquil space, like you're almost like a protect, because it's basically a highway there, and there's a bunch of roads coming together. Do you know what the timeline you're sort of thinking about for when it becomes this larger memorial park?
Well, we're hoping around 2027 to at least start it, maybe 2028. Some of it's dependent on the Ville de Montréal. They have to relocate Bridge Street, and they've all agreed to relocate Bridge Street. There are some infrastructure under the road that have to be rerouted, so it's quite a big project. So that probably, once that's done, then we can really get moving on it. So it's a matter of waiting for Bridge Street to be moved. But it is interesting that you did say that you did mention Griffintown. When we talk about the Irish in Quebec, a lot of people, including the Irish, make the mistake of thinking that all the Irish arrived in 1847 at the time of this famine. And it's just not a fact. In reality, another big, large, major group arrived some 25 years earlier, around the 1820s. And so, as you mentioned, things like Griffintown was already a thriving Irish community. St. Patrick's Church became a basilica in March of 1847, just before the Irish arrived. This year will be the 200th parade of the Irish. So obviously the Irish were here and moving along quite nicely prior to 1847. And many people in Quebec who determined that they have some level of Irish heritage are probably from that earlier group, because not that many from the actual famine Irish of 1847 remained. They moved on to Toronto and point westward and some south to Chicago and Detroit and other places like that.
Right. I know up Shannon, Valcartier area, it's the same story. It's the Napoleonic era, 1820s, Napoleonic Wars. Those settlements, same in the Gaspésie, the Irish settlements were usually more like around 1819, 1820. Although there was sometimes an influx of people, there's there's stories of the famine, Irish everywhere in Quebec, for both francophones and anglophones. It's typically, I would agree, it's what is often most remembered, and it kind of takes over like the whole story of the Irish in Quebec. And of course, like you pointed out, it isn't just that.
No, definitely not. The other project we work on that you're familiar with is St. Columban. That was entirely pre-Irish. They founded a community in the 1820s. So yeah. There were,
And you have your family story goes back to St. Columban as well. I think you were once telling me.
Yeah. My family arrived around 1821 or 1822 in St. Columban. So that would have been, 25 years before the events of 1847. That's it. Right. The other thing that's interesting that I didn't mention that people might probably know, but just this issue is that obviously as the 6,000 Irish died in Montreal and the 5,000 died in Grosse-Île, and Quebec got hit with the largest number of deaths of these Irish immigrants, there were a lot of orphans left, probably in the thousands, maybe as many as 1,000 at both Quebec and in Montreal. But these orphans, like we're saying, the Irish were already here. So some of the Irish that were already here adopted some of these orphans, but there were so many that a great number of them were adopted by French-speaking Quebecois families. And that's why the common expression is that there are about 40% of all Quebecers today, regardless of language, who share some Irish heritage. So it's interesting how the Irish and the French community got together. In some ways, obviously many of them were Catholics, so there was a religious component from the 1840 period of time. But so it's you can end up with a Patrick O'Reilly who is not very familiar with the English community. So
yeah, same in Gaspé. O'Connors and Dunns. No one expects an O'Connor or a Dunn to speak English in Gaspésie, and they haven't for a long time either.
That's it.
But that's that story, Yeah,
that's just the story of the Irish in Quebec, which is, I guess, the focus of today's talk.
Right. Thank you so much, Fergus. I really appreciate it. Great to see you and good work. Can't wait to see. Can't wait to go there in person. Really, I've always wanted to be able to spend more time at that site, and it seems like it's on the near horizon.
Yep. Yeah, it's coming along.
All right. Take care, and thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We're about to head west on this virtual journey. Leaving Montreal, we're going to go along the Ottawa River past Gatineau and Ottawa. Got the old Highway 148, follows the river deep into the Pontiac region until the road finally stops. So there, 2 hours upstream, we arrive at the village of Sheenboro, which has been called the most Irish place in Quebec. And our next two guests are going to tell us all about Sheenboro and its new archives they set up there. So let me introduce them. Joanne McCann grew up across from Sheenboro in Petawawa, Ontario, but she's had a cottage there since the mid-60s. 3 of her siblings live in Sheenboro. She's worked as an historical researcher of First Nations land claims for 35 years, and she's applied those skills and graduate research to the history of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg in Fort William in Sheenboro. Given the unique history of Sheenboro, which includes its Hudson's Bay Company fur trading post, Oiseau Rock, lumbering, Irish chain migration, and its unique musical traditions, Joanne feels that this place merits its own archives to celebrate and document that heritage. Next, we have Lorna Brennan Agnesi. Lorna was born in Sheenboro, but began her teaching career in Montreal before moving to Elmer and then settling back in her hometown. She served on the Sheenboro Municipal Council for 3 terms. Inspired by hearing her father and his siblings speak of the old days and family relations, she's had a long interest in genealogy and local history. She enjoys playing fiddle at the local pub on Wednesday nights and at jam sessions in the area. She's helped organize homecoming celebrations for graduates of the local school, as well as shows celebrating the musical heritage of the area. Welcome, Lorna and Joanne. I'm wondering if we could start, as you get your mics unmuted, I wonder if we could start by just having you give us a sense of Sheenboro. Give us a deeper picture of its geography, its landscape, economy, and just a bit about its history and its Irish heritage, of course.
I should turn it over to Lorna. She's born there. I'm not.
Lorna, what do you think about that?
Whatever. Sure.
Oh, Jack, hi.
Okay, we'll tell you about Sheenboro. Sheenboro is a small little hamlet on the Ottawa River, and is 150 kilometers west of Gatineau. It was originally settled by Irish immigrants in the 1840s. They came here for farmland and working in the lumber mills, the lumber trade. My dad did also. The women stayed home to look after the children and the farms. They brought with them music, culture, and a way of life, which is evidence of which is still strong to this day in Sheenboro. We still celebrate the St. Patrick's Day, which is coming up soon. Everybody wears green. And we have many fiddlers and singers and step dancers who keep the tradition alive. Books and songs have been written about the Irish influence in the area. When people think of Sheenboro, we call it Sheen, they think Irish. We have a great tourist attractions. Our tourist attractions are hiking. One of them is up on my brother Jack's Brennan's recreational farms, a big mountain. And the Weasel Rock, which Joanne will probably talk about. And there's a legend there where the young girl jumps off the rock, eh, Joanne?
Yeah, it's a story.
You'll tell the story. Hotel Pontiac, which is situated at the former Hudson's Bay Trading Post and Fort William. And we have our can walk in our nature conservatory of Sheenboro Conservatory, where there's fishing and hunting and many other activities. Okay, I wrote down a lot of little tidbits. We have a big Canada Day celebration every year. It's the biggest one in the Pontiac. A lot of people attend it, where we have music and dance. And now, our church was the cornerstone of life in Sheenboro since the Irish settled here. We have a big hall here, which is in very good shape, and it holds about 150 people, or 200 if you want to sneak them in. Our array holds dances and other events, St. Patrick's, Valentine's, and a lot of people rent our hall. Now, music is a big part of life in Sheenboro. Many musicians came from this little town, and other artists, fiddlers, piano players, guitar players. And we always had a great choir when the nuns were here in the church. We have Louis Schreier right down the road. He is a champion fiddler who now lives in Chapel, and he's married to a cousin of mine. He plays for our dances, and he also taught many of us to play the violin, and still does today. So I don't know what else you want to hear about Sheen. Maybe Joanne will take over and tell the rest.
Well, do you have another question, Glenn? Do you want me to?
No, I want to hear your perspective, because I know you have that. Seems like you have maybe an archaeological or anthropological background as well. But yeah, tell us, maybe just give us a slightly different view on Sheen.
Yeah, well, so I'm Ottawa Valley Irish from the other side of the river, but my husband is Quebec Irish. His mother was a McNally behind Shawville. And the McGills went through Grosse-Île and went down to Megantic County on the Celtic Way. But, although I'm like Ottawa Valley Irish, I was drawn to Sheenboro for the beauty and the river. And my grandfather and 5 generations of the McCanns worked in lumbering, which kind of defined Sheenboro a bit, in the early history, aside from farming. I just read Michael McBain's book about Bytown, and he talks about when the canal was built in Bytown or Ottawa. I didn't know there was a recession after that. And then you would have posters and seeking Irish to go working and logging. And a really good work about David Lee, he worked for Parks Canada, and he talked about the Ottawa Valley in that, there are pockets of good farmland, and Sheenboro has it in the Downey Lakes, good clay-based. But the Irish provided labor for the logging camps. And, my own family, where they settled in Lanark County, it's terrible farmland. So hence they worked in farming. And that was kind of the draw. I hate to say in Sheenboro, the first settler, John Downey, but he was one of the first families that, worked probably in the canal and then worked his way up to Sheenboro to get land and work in logging. And so that, around the 1830s, we had many people heading to Sheenboro to work in those lumber camps on the Des Moines, the Schwaya, up the Ottawa River. And where my cottage is, those sleds would go up the river and bring supplies to the lumber camps. But we also had a master's thesis by Sean Darcy. His dad grew up in Sheenboro, and he said that many Sheenboro people worked, they called it an agroforestry economy. They had a farm, but they would go work the lumber camps for wage labor, and then in the spring, start cultivating their farm. So, and he did that through, looking at censuses and that. The really interesting part is by 1871, 3/4 of Sheenboro was Irish. We did have French, we did have Scottish that worked at the Hudson's Bay Post, but that post closed by 1869 because the logging had pushed out the hunting by the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. So the hunting wasn't great, and the Hudson's Bay Post actually supplied the logging camps. And as you know, the logging camps cultivated their own musical traditions where we have depictions of men square dancing with men. And, my own grandfather, he worked for Gillies up in the Schwaya, not far from Sheenboro, and he did step dancing. And, he ate pie from breakfast. Those were all, logging, lumbering traditions. And, Sheenboro has kept that going, which is amazing. Now, what I want to do is also tell the story. Yes, men worked in lumber camps and farming and barn raising. Let's tell the story of women. And Lorna has a funny expression that, whenever you go to a Sheen event, you never leave hungry. That is the women, the story of women who would, feed the men who were maybe bringing in the harvest or barn raising. We had women that were midwives and served as doctors. Because Sheen is kind of the end of the highway, especially before the bridge was built to Pembroke. And this is a kind of thing, resilience, musical and heritage tradition that we want to document, notable people like Dr. QAHN. He was of 3 generations of 13 children. He lost his dad very young. And that kind of made him want to be a doctor, but also the story of women too. We had a lady, Mary Sullivan Roy, that lived to be 106. She moved down to Detroit, but she would come back with her sister. Her sister was in her 90s, and she would help take care of her for the summer. A 90-year-old taking care of a 100-year-old. And whenever I'd see Mary Roy kneel in church, I thought, I better kneel. This woman's, close to 100. There's no excuse for me not to kneel on that hard, the kneeler. So these are the kind of stories our archives wants to document. We do have the Pontiac Archives in Shawville. They do a great job, but we want to capture the unique heritage of Sheenboro.
I wonder if you could actually take us back a little bit. I know it is a newer initiative, but do either of you want to tell us about how this archives came about? And tell us when that happened too.
It was Lorna's idea, so she needs to talk.
Lorna, you're up.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a large family, and as you said, in the introduction, my mom and dad, they were very interested in our relatives. You had to know who your relatives were. And my dad being somewhat of an historian, he really got me interested in genealogy. So when I returned back to Sheen from teaching in Montreal and different places, I just kind of thought something has to be done because the people are all talking about heritage all the time. So we need a place to display our work. So I mentioned it to a few people, and Joanne here was one of the first ones to say yes. A small group of people were of similar interests, and there was a positive and immediate response. My brother Jack, right beside me here, he's on our committee too. And by the way, he's a good Irish singer. Maybe he'll sing you a song after. Anyway, the municipal council, of which I am a councillor, agreed to give us a large room in their building, and they applied for a grant. We got it, and we refurbished the space. We opened up on June the 1st and had a great celebration. 70 to 80 people came out. They were very interested, and we were very happy that they did come out. Since then, we have received a lot of donations of furniture, family trees, local historic documents. So I feel we're off to a good start, but much remains to be done.
Can I
invite you all up sometime?
Okay, go ahead, Joanne.
I was just going to say too, we lost Andrew Perrow. He was my history teacher. He grew up in Sheen. Part of his farm was the Hudson's Bay post, which was about 800 acres. And he had the post there from the original, Hudson's Bay post. But Lorna's brother, Billy and Brennan and Betty Morris continued with Andrew and wrote another book. So we have another perspective aside from Sean's. And then we had a priest, Father Burke, and he kind of recorded, in most communities, you have that first oral history. So we're all reading that and hearing other stories, And then, Joan Finnegan, she was from Shawville, daughter of Frank Finnegan, the NHL player. She recorded some of the stories of Sheenboro, but, we need more of a grassroots type of stories, of women and also trying to figure out that chain migration and those connections between families, because chain migration happened in New Zealand, Australia, the States, where a family would sponsor another family, help them get settled, pay their passage. So in Sheenboro, we want to kind of explore that. I know Betty is documenting some of the songs about Sheenboro, the square dances. We have to do more work like that, and that's kind of our mission. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but it's all good fun,
Lovely. What are your collections like so far? Tell us about how many items you have or what kinds of items you have. Maybe even some favorites or things that have stood out so far.
Lorna, do you want to answer that?
Excuse me. Well, we have some great music, some records and tapes of people right from Sheen here who made music, I guess, in the area and around Niagara Falls. I know my uncle made a tape, kind of like Hank Snow. And we have many family trees, pictures old and new. We have memorial cards, music, songs, albums, Sean Darcy's work, old school registers and maps, historic sites around Sheen, I guess, Hudson Bay posts, Indian graveyard, which is at Fort William, where many farmers drew their logs in, Weasel Rock. Lumber camp pictures for sure. Yep. And also in Sheen, there was a bomb site at a farm in Sheen where one child died. And just many things to talk about in Sheen.
Is it accessible to the public yet, your archives, or is it more like you have to make an appointment? Okay, so they can come in and explore the collection.
There's nobody working there full time, but they would contact me or Joanne or Jack, or they all live around Sheen, the volunteers,
All right.
And Sheen has its own song called the Sheenboro Way. Jack, sing a little bit of the beginning. It goes to the tune of Galway Bay.
We need some music here.
Oh yeah, a little bit of music from
If
Sheen.
you ever see a signpost marked Sheenboro, keep coming for a welcome, greet you there. Where kind hearts and ever smiling faces come to greet you and your burden share. There, that's one verse.
And it ends up by saying,
Beautiful.
it ends up by
Beautiful.
saying,
It's a long song.
yeah, St. Patrick will think he's right in Ireland, shaking hands with Shays and Berrigans.
Very touching, you guys. Thanks for sharing that. Just to wrap up, tell us what's happening this green season for St. Patrick's in Sheenboro. What's on the agenda?
Well, there is a little pub down the road in Chichester, and we usually go there for Irish stew and music and dance, fiddles. Yeah, a little band from around the area plays.
Very good. Joanne, are you going to be at that?
I can't be in Sheen because, well, I might go ahead up St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to be where my grandfather's in our prior. That's where he's from. And so I'm going to go to a thing there. I was at a fesh today at St. Bridget's in Ottawa. My granddaughter was Irish dancing there, Lucy. And then I'll work my way up to Sheen for St. Paddy's Day. And hopefully get to the pub that Lorna was talking about. It's quite crowded, but it's fun.
People are going to Douglas for a meet party.
Yeah, a lot of people go out to Douglas, Ontario too. There's a big party out there in a barn. We're all invited out there, so we might go there too.
Lovely.
You bar hop on that day.
I love it. You can still bar hop. You know, it's not. You don't have to be in Montreal or Quebec City to go bar hopping. You can be in Pontiac or the Ottawa Valley. Thank you so much, you two, for telling us about Sheenboro and the great new initiative you got going on. And as you know, I've said to you both, I can't wait to get out there in person. It's been on the bucket list for a long time.
You're
That's
welcome
good.
anytime. Lorna's a
invited.
great baker. You got to stop at her house. Cookies and
Yeah, we have a room for him whenever he wants to come.
Lovely, lovely.
Thanks for having
right.
us. This was really interesting. I learned a lot. today.
Yes.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So nice to have you.
Yeah.
Have a great afternoon, you two.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Mel.
Thanks, Glenn, for having us.
All right, my pleasure. Well, we had a little musical prelude there. That was unexpected. I love that. I can't wait to hear some more of that great Sheenboro singing. Maybe some fiddling. Maybe even do a square dance. So we're now. I guess this kind of sets us up well. We're ready to head down to the virtual Zoom pub to hear some Irish tin whistle and flute virtuosity from a longtime pillar of Irish music in Montreal. I want to introduce Dave Gossage. He's one of Montreal's most respected and experienced musicians. Once cited by the Montreal Gazette music critic as Montreal's, quote, secret weapon, he switches from flute to guitar, whistles, harmonica with ease, and is comfortable in virtually all styles of music. He attended the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto and later received his degree from Concordia in Montreal, where he specialized in theory and composition. Over the years, he's played in all styles of music, including African, classical, rock, funk, but he's probably best known for his jazz and Celtic playing. He's headed his own group in both these styles and is considered one of the pioneers of the acid jazz scene here in Montreal. He's played in North American venues from Mexico, from New Mexico to New York City, from Louisiana to the Baffin Islands, and all over Europe. He also teaches jazz at McGill and Concordia. Dave, I want to welcome you. I know we're going to do a little test. You're going to test your sound.
Yeah, I don't know
we've been working on this all week. It's not obvious how to play music over Zoom, especially if you have a backing track. So let's test your backing track. I hear it beautifully. You're good to go.
And do you hear me talking?
Oh, we sure do.
Okay.
The stars aligned.
So many ghosts have been in our machine. It's incredible.
Terrible. All right. Well, yeah, it was meant to be, Dave.
Okay. Do you want to just go in and give it?
Yeah, give us a tune.
Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Hey.
Dave. Lovely. We had Dave on 5 years ago. It was the height of the pandemic, and we had to celebrate Irish heritage, and he helped us out then. And I know last time we were talking a bit about your, I think your reverb is still on there. We talked a bit about your family connection. Of course, earlier the name we mentioned St. Columba as well. But I know your history with Irish music, Celtic music. It's not necessarily the most obvious one, although you do have a family connection. But tell us a little bit about the family and then how you eventually found your way to Celtic music.
Well, you were speaking at Kelly O'Rourke. She's my cousin, and my grandmother, Annie O'Rourke, they're from St. Columban, and Michael O'Rourke, and so we used to have where I first started hearing is when I was a kid, because and there's an Irish tradition, you have a big New Year's Eve party, and you have and just square dancing, and my grandmother, she was a fiddler, so she was a very good fiddler, she won a champ, she was like a Quebec little star, little Annie Scully back in the day when she was up in St. Columban. But so I used to hear it all the time, this music. I never really played it, so I was just I was into jazz and rock, and like a lot of younger people are and things like that. But we always had a great time at the parties. But then when I was already working as a professional musician, playing jazz gigs and playing rhythm and blues gigs and different instruments and things like that. And Kirk McGecky from Montreal, who was on Green Linnet Records at the time, his whistle player left the band, and he said, "Dave, do you want to?" He was a friend from just on St. Lawrence Boulevard, and he said, "Do you want to try this music?" I said, "Well, geez, Kirk, I've never really played much of it. Because playing flute is a different thing than all fiddlers when they grow up. They're sort of playing it. Flute, we don't. I mean, in Ireland you do, but in North America, you have to have a real all Irish sort of upbringing. Like my father wasn't Irish, my mother was Irish, so we had half and half. He was English, and she was Irish, and so I was familiar with it, but I never played it. And then he said, well, he gave me some flute players, and the first one was Matt Malloy, of course. And of course, I was totally blown away. I went, oh my God, he's amazing. And I did like every good jazz musician. I tried to write down everything he was playing, and it was a disaster. But I learned a bunch of tunes, but it was I was so lucky, I was immediately the band Orialis, like I said, we were on Green Linnet, so we were immediately thrown into every big major folk festival, every Celtic festival, and I'd meet all these. I met Seamus Egan, we're hanging out. I don't really know his and a lot of these different big Irish stars. So what I would do is a lot of the Irish people, the Irish stars who play traditional music, wanted to learn how to improvise. So what we do is we'd sit in our hotel rooms, and I'd teach them stuff about improv, and they'd teach me stuff about how to play tunes properly. So it was, and because I had first learned it by ear, and I realized I'm doing this all wrong, and then and then I went back and started. And when being on tour, and then really getting into it. And then also another friend of mine asked me to start playing at the old Dublin pub. So that was I was playing at the old Dublin pub, and I don't know if you remember Brendan Nolan, and I played with Brendan and Liam and Jerry O'Neill. In fact, last night at the pub at Hurley's, we did a set of tunes, and I said to Kate, our fiddler, Kate Bevan Baker, I said, that's the first set of tune I ever learned, like that Jerry taught me. So it sort of, and then it took off, this was like early 90s. And then there was a big boom of Celtic music becoming popular with bands like Great Big Sea and Waterboys and the Pogues, of course. And then subsequently, so the band we were in, Orialis, we were doing even more sort of touring and things like that. And then it was just then steady gigs in the pub all the time, and then it was interesting how it sort of all came around from when I used to go to those parties when I was a kid. Like still play jazz and everything, but I most of my touring is with Celtic music, like with Irish.
Okay. Let's hear some more music. It'd be great. Thanks for putting that in context, though. I think it's a neat story.
Well, it's when you play flute, the reason is you don't have I also play guitar, so everybody was in the. I had a choice to play in the pubs, playing Irish music, or like 2 gigs a month playing jazz flute, or playing all the time in funk bands playing guitar. And like I would play keyboards too, and I'd always bring my flute, and they'd say, well, maybe we'll do 1 song or 2 songs. And then here I get to this music where they say, Dave, you can play flute all night long, and I say, I'm in.
We'd love it.
I'm gonna do actually, this is a Scottish air we used to do with Aurealis. It's called The Music of Spey. Like Kirk always used to say, like the good whiskey. So that's how it works.
Wow, just gorgeous, Dave. Really, really nice. I was thinking, you mentioned the 90s era. I think we often use this term, the Celtic Tiger. I certainly remember it. I was in high school. I remember those bands, and you could hear like Celtic music on Much Music or Music Plus if you're in Quebec.
Oh, yeah.
It was a huge time. Riverdance obviously came out. Can you give us a sense of the trajectory of Irish music in Montreal, in the scene that you're part of since the 90s? How has it changed over the years? What have been some of the developments and just differences you've seen from, I guess, in about 1990 to 2025?
Well, essentially, there's a lot less of us. What happened when the old Dublin pub was always Irish music, Hurley's was always Irish music, and then all the other Irish pubs opened and they just became classic rock places with Guinness mirrors. So what happened was back when the old Dublin was the only pub, and then when Hurley's opened, and Hurley's was the second, but an Irish pub. It was an Irish cultural center, and some would say now like Hurley's is like an Irish cultural icon in the city, like for all the Irish events and everything that goes on there. What happened, I think the biggest change I notice is that although people still respond to it the way the jigs and the reels and the upbeat songs and all that, it's great, but they don't know the music as well as they used to know it. That's the big change. I mean, because when I will kudos to Alan and friends in Great Big Sea, because they brought the sort of East Coast, which the East Coasters always say it's our music. Well, I say, well, a lot of the music you're playing is just Irish music, or we play like Irish and Scottish music, But what they did was they bring a traditional kind of music that is a combination of Irish, Scottish, and Newfoundland, and like they that helped elevate the pub scene. So you got a different tier of it, where they would know those songs, and that always breeds a sort of getting into the tune aspect of it, because when people you just see them instead of like funk dancing all up there jigging, like the whole young people, like last night at the pub, I swear everybody was there was 18, and they're all up jigging. That's what we like to see, like it's because it keeps the music alive, and so I guess the biggest change for me is that the ballads don't get the same response as they used to. It used to be like, we do Fields of Athenry and the whole pub is singing, and that still happens, but not as often. It'll happen on St. Pat's, and it happens when we have, because, the thing about the Irish is when they go to another city, they're just looking for Ireland. They always come to the pub. It could be because of the Guinness, but I'm not sure. But so that's the biggest thing I've noticed over the years, is that the influx of sort of classic rock has sort of, it's a battle that I'm fighting tooth and nail. Anybody will tell you.
God bless you, Dave.
We throw in, we throw it in because it's a party, and we're not militant about it, but this is an Irish pub, and we're gonna play like Irish and Scottish. We're gonna play Celtic music, and Celtic, that's that big umbrella. That includes Newfie music and all that music too, and because it's all the same Quebecois music, like it's all, the funny thing about it all seems to be sort of based in both Irish and Scottish. It's all the Canadian. I mean, it's diaspora. That's the way it goes. Like it's in Glengarry, it's all sort of Scottish, and Cape Breton, it's all Scottish, and Newfoundland, it's Irish, and Quebec, it's Quebecois, which is essentially just Irish. I mean, the tunes, don't quote me on that, but I'll get...
No, it's very true. I mean, the fact is they play the most common tune form in Quebec is the reel, which comes from Scotland, but through Ireland, and
and
so
it's
anyways,
also,
you're totally right.
It's like, and a lot of my Quebecois, my French-speaking Quebecer friends who play the music, we'll know the same tunes with different names. Like, oh, that's an Irish tune. That's that's not just translations, but totally different names. Oh, that's a different tune. Which is fun. I mean, I love that. But they play this music also up, and I play in Nunavut, and up there, because of the Scottish whalers and with the Irish on the boat, they do jigs and they all play accordion up there, and they, you know, it's same sort of thing. So
we definitely share a musical heritage, goes beyond one ethnicity, one language even. So yeah, it's been here in North America a long time too.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think of it's like we're like the music over here is like the grandchildren of the music over there, but really we're more like cultural cousins, and maybe they're half a generation older than us over in Ireland. But you know, we've been playing this music here since like the 1700s. So.
Oh, for sure, yeah. One thing I'll have to say in terms of the pubs, though, the St. Patrick's is always the same. St. Patrick's Day is always it's like it's really of course everybody's Irish, you know, like, and you know. It's insane. I mean, I just love this city for that. I mean, I bet when they used to close down Grass, you know, like on a nice day when everybody's outside on the street, you know, it's pretty special. Thing. Yeah.
Let's have some more music, Dave.
Maybe I'll do I was gonna do I'll do a faster reel type thing. This is 3 reels. Low Mountain, Bell Harbor. Ah, jeez, I always forget the name of the third one. And another one.
Amazing, Dave. Amazing. And I know you have the jazz background. Literally, I see Miles in the background and John Coltrane. And I heard some notes being bent there, and some that was wild. I love it.
Those are some of my party tricks I have like that. Like, because I also play bansuri, like the Indian flute. So
Okay.
you get used to sliding. So I go. And then,
Awesome.
And then, of course, the circular breathing. So if I circular breathe, I don't even have to take a breath. Like, I can just go on for days. It comes
That's
in very,
amazing.
it comes in very handy. And I do that, and it's not because of the jazz thing. It's someone said, I saw this whistle player in Dublin. He was circular breathing. And I said, I'm going to have to learn how to do that.
Well, thanks for giving us that behind the scenes of the little extra virtuosic touches.
Yeah.
Dave, I'd like you to take us out with one more piece if you got something on deck.
Sure. I think a little bit more laid back. Let me think. This one I'm going to play on the alto flute. And you don't usually see the alto flute in Irish music so much. Sorry. I still got you? The alto flute's a lot longer, so sometimes you...
That was off camera, though.
yeah. Okay. But the girl in Fluke plays one, in Fluke, the band. I've seen a few bands where they play them, but I just love the sound. So, it's a song, a jig called "Hole in the Hedge." Martin Hayes does a great recording of it.
Just wow, love the timbre of that instrument, and
Yeah, it's
knowing
gorgeous.
Martin. You mentioned Martin Hayes, and that works so well for his style. He often, I think, I don't know if he tunes low, but he's got such a delicate kind of
Oh yeah, his
dark touch. His tone is so good.
I love his records. The first time I heard that, I was playing in a pub St. Alexander at a Celtic festival there, and late night, and everybody had left. It was just me and Kirk, and the owner put that on, and I was like, this is so nice. I mean, it's so beautiful. No one does a song slow like that, like he. I mean, it was amazing.
I know it is a burning melodeon reel, actually. So
yeah, I know, really.
That was
That's
cool.
how I've heard it too.
Dave, that was such a lovely way, I think, to wrap us up today. Just beautiful. I can't, no words. Thank you so much also
Thanks
for
for
your
having me.
patience. As mentioned, this didn't come easy, but we worked it out.
It was tough. It's okay. I mean, it's all like, technology these days.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
It always
but,
works eventually somehow.
That's what I tell everyone on these Zoom events. We will get it to work. But well, anyways, what a joy to have you. Thanks for sharing
Glenn.
your story
Appreciate
as well.
it. Thanks.
Always
It's nice
a
to hear all
pleasure.
those the stories that I heard there.
So many great comments
yeah.
on Zoom. So many kind words. We really appreciate it, everyone. We do this because we love this sort of stuff, and it's just great. The range of talent and the insights different people bring. Just to sort of wrap up here, I was just doing I scoured the internet a bit. I wanted to see when all the St. Patrick's things were happening in case people here online are interested. So the 56th edition of the Shannon Irish Show, which came up in Allison's documentary, that's 15th of March. There's 2 showings at 1 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. So if you're in the Quebec area, try to head up to that. Fergus mentioned the 200th edition of the Montreal St. Patrick's Parade. That's the next day on the 16th. There is in Quebec City, I guess it's the following week, March 22nd at 2 p.m. That's when they're doing their parade. Richmond, Quebec, just outside of Sherbrooke. That's also March 16th, 2 p.m. Ottawa, the day before, March 15th, which is also a special celebration of the 200th anniversary of the birth of Thomas D'Arcy McGee, who was a founding father of Confederation and an Irish Canadian as well. I'm going to be out in Huntingdon on the U.S. border at the Legion on March 16th, the afternoon. If any of you are in the Chateauguay Valley area or Glengarry County, Ontario, you can head over there. So that wraps up our program today. I want to thank all our guests. Look up their organizations and their music online. I know Dave has a great website. Keep an eye out for their activities. I want to thank our sponsors once again, the Zeller Family Foundation and Canadian Heritage, for their support of QAHN's Heritage Talk series. As always, a huge thanks to our tech producer, Allison Kirkwood, for her brilliant work behind the scenes on Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube. All of our Heritage Talks are archived on QAHN's Facebook page. Now that only happens for 30 days. So all our live streams get taken down after 30 days. It's a new Facebook policy. But if we also have a YouTube channel that this is going to. So if you want to see it a month, 2 months from now, head over to our YouTube channel, subscribe. That's where I would say that if you want to share this with friends and family and you want them to be able to see it more than 30 days from now, YouTube's the place to do that. So you can also check out our back catalog of all our stuff since 2020 has been archived there. Finally, thanks to all of you who joined us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. We appreciate your support, your comments, the lively discussion you bring in the chat. So our next Heritage Talk is coming up this Thursday. It's with Dr. Dorothy Williams, who'll be telling us all about the NCC. That was an institution of vital importance to Montreal's Black community in the 20th century. She's going to be telling us all about how the NCC seeded the leadership and development of Black English-speaking community organizations across Montreal Island. So that's next Thursday at 7 p.m. here on Heritage Talks. Information on attending can be found on the QAHN website, QAHN.org, or our Facebook page. That's all for today. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and happy green season. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Slàinte.